Welcome back. This is number two of our series tied to supply chain. My name is Mike Boyle, and I am truly blessed to have Sophia back with me. Thank you very much again for joining me today, Sophia. Our
Good
subject
morning.
today will be tied to global supply chains and certainly trying to uncover some of those elements that we don't necessarily think of. And just give you an example, because of the pandemic, we think, oh yeah, so we'll just go ahead and come up with local supplying, and we don't really realize all the damage that we're causing. And so that will be certainly one of the subjects that we'll be talking about, and a few others. So again, Sophie, thank you very much for joining me today. And I think we'll go ahead and start with you. We'll take a little bit more, bit of a different format today. We'll be working with a webinar format. And I think with that, if I can go ahead and hand the baton over to you, Sophia, up you
Absolutely.
go.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm really happy, to be here and then have the opportunity to discuss this subject, especially during these times in COVID. And as you said, I can only repeat that we really need to take a look at how we impact what we are doing around us, especially in globalized supply chains. And as you can see on the chart that we are sharing at the moment, this is from the World Economic Forum, of course, and their statistics. It really seems that we are heading in a direction where we have another wave of impact on people, and a new era of poverty is coming up on us because of how we are managing and how we got here so far, right? So if you take a look, really, Southeast Asia and East Asia and the Pacific, they are the most impacted areas in all of the three categories of poverty, as if I may put it that way, which is already very bad to take a look at. So for me, this is heartbreaking to even discuss the subject, but I think that's exactly why we need to discuss, and we need to take a look at how global supply chains are responsible and how they can be held accountable for what they are doing in general, and explore the concepts of what supply chains can do, especially in a globalized way, to move away from causing damage to local communities and to get back to building local communities as such, and come up with innovation and come up with ways of working which works no matter where they are on the planet and which part of the planet they are impacting. So let's just explore and change to how these companies have been operating so far, right? So for those who know or might not have full supply chain exposure or expertise, of course, in the last few decades, most of the supply chains have been really outsourcing and offshoring in many of the Western European economies, and there, what we have seen and also worked in it, right? So I was also part of that problem, if I'm really honest. As such, I work in globalized supply chains. And there, what I've seen and experienced is it's so easy to communicate, only the pros of those solutions of outsourcing and offshoring and global shared service centers. So it's easy to communicate all the pros and how this will, provide money for the companies from a strictly business perspective, right? We are only looking at the money and how corporations can make a lot of money, but we never really touch on the impact of how it helps or doesn't help in that sense local communities, and how we are externalizing some of the problems that come with these moves, and the local communities are left to deal with this, including unemployment or change of jobs or reskilling a complete community in some cases, right? So if we really take a total look and an honest, reality-based total look at these actions that globalized supply chains have been taking over the last few decades, then we can easily see that many of these aspects that have a huge impact on many of the communities, regardless of where they are not always, and in many cases, very detrimental to those communities, right? And they will definitely result in backlash from those communities and also in failure to correct, if something has gone wrong, or even just correct the understanding of what should have been taken into consideration as part of that activity, right? So as you can see on the screen, when many of the companies started offshoring from the US, of course, there were counteractions from the local communities, and that's what you can see in this picture as well here, which might seem funny, but if we really take a look, it's really not that funny. And even recently, during COVID, in a short span of 3-4 months' time, right? If we just think about the current pace of offshoring, which is slowing down compared to the previous decades, we are still at the rate of 30,000-40,000 jobs over a quarter, right? So that's still quite a number of jobs that are being moved around, and the workers, unfortunately, or those whose jobs are being offshored, they are not benefiting from this. But also, let's explore then in the next few slides what we see as part of these moves from global companies, and let's just again take a total look at the impact, and why I put this really busy slide here. I just wanted to also emphasize the complexity of what the companies are dealing with, but also what the communities are dealing with. If you take a look at the top right side, right, where I just pictured one of the many examples of an area and a community per se, in this case in the UK, Manchester, right, where when they started offshoring certain manufacturing and outsourcing, of course, certain manufacturing areas, and the majority of what they had and what they built their livelihoods upon, they definitely experienced a lot of negative impact in terms of finding new jobs for those people, and also to reskill them. And in many cases, they have found opportunities in lower paid jobs than they previous had. I don't say this is the total view of the problem, and of course there are many elements that contribute positively to that balance, but in terms of local community and how we generate income for a local community through jobs and through innovation, and how we perceive the economic livelihood of that area, then it's definitely a total negative impact, because what they were offshoring is not only just jobs or roles and manufacturing, but also the know-how, the innovation capability, and all of these aspects that have never been taken into consideration. And of course, if you take a look at the left-hand side of the slide, this had a seemingly positive impact on the other side in Asian communities, for instance, that we have been seeing in the previous slide as the major impacted group here right now as part of COVID. But that there was a huge job surge, right, in their communities, and also in Eastern Europe, for instance, in many cases. And of course, these jobs have been highly specialized, highly focused on certain elements. So it's also a difference in terms of how they have been designed from a job and role perspective, which also made it even cheaper than before, because these were not complex roles, but highly specialized ones, right? So there I would say, yes, it might have seemed to be a good move and a really positive impact on those local communities. However, in many cases, those communities have been moved either from a different set of jobs, which were potentially not higher paying, but more complex and more fulfilling as a human and professional aspect. And then they were forced to move into these newly created jobs, because these were the only ones available, right, in certain areas. Specifically, I can give you specific examples related to Eastern Europe, where many of the manufacturing aspects have been destroyed from the economy. And of course, many others have come in return within 10-15 years of the time. But in between, only those jobs have flourished, which were lower paid or not really fulfilling. It was part of a shared service center or anything that is really focused and people did not really feel that they have been employing their skills and potential the right way and the way they would like it to be, just to be able to manage and make ends meet every month, right? So, and at the same time, again, so after all of these moves, right, and when we come to COVID again, just to close this circle here very quickly, just wanted to highlight that, of course, when we started seeing, the impact of COVID and how the global supply chains started breaking up in certain places, then of course we started thinking about reshoring and having innovation and everything here. But of course, the huge question mark here is: are we really thinking only with the value of money as such, as you can see it right in the middle? So money moves, right? So especially hot money, as we usually describe some of the investment money that moves around globally. But I think we really miss a huge mark here from an ethical and human perspective, where we simply just think money and profits, right, from a company point of view. And the livelihoods of these people, if we reshore again many of the activities that we push there, right, then of course they are the ones who incur the loss again. So for me, and that's why we have this conversation here today, we need to find, a solution where moving these activities around as part of globalized supply chains leave a positive mark on local communities, and they can benefit from the activities that they are doing. And we are not just going ahead and think with our, money driven and focused mindset, right? So if we just take a look at, the next slide, I just try to summarize here really those, aspects and those results that we see directly coming from this type of behavior from globalized companies. And if we are really honestly taking a look at the negative impact of how we have been managing and measuring these activities, right? How we thought that these are okay to do. We can easily see that in those countries where we have placed, certain activities, there are misplaced innovation, right? So if I take a look at some of these countries, they innovate for the US or for Western Europe, but they never use that innovation, right? Because they are only innovating for that area. So is it really value add and useful for them as a local community? No, it's definitely not. And we also entered an era of lack of real innovation, right? Or lack of innovation as such, because even if there is incremental innovation around these activities, and sometimes even bigger ones, they are also not serving the local communities, right? And the actual misplacement of innovation and lack of innovation in areas where we would need even more results also in over-engineering some of the innovations and some of the processes, right? So we try to go by so much these incremental little missteps that we are making, and I use misstep for a reason. We try to see, so many things in so much detail that we are missing the mark, and we cannot see the wood for the trees any longer, right? So there we really see over-engineering of specialized processes, which should never take place, right? And of course, we ended up with a lot of unnecessary solutions and goods which are polluting our environment. And with that said, those unnecessary solutions are also taking a lot of money, because it's not just innovation, but also resources used ongoing, right, to fuel those solutions and to make them available for the markets. And of course, this short-term view really resulted in loss of income and loss of livelihoods for those who are involved in any of these activities from a community perspective, if they are impacted, right? And there is no part of the world by now which wasn't impacted, to be honest. So we just need to take a look at ourselves and start thinking through, or asking even older generations around us how they went through these different types of activities and what their reflections are. I think we could learn a lot there. And of course, on the other side, in those countries where we are offshoring to or outsourcing to, those countries are simply just left to deal with waste and problems of others, right? So typically, in case of offshoring and outsourcing, many of the processes and the activities that had been initially offshored and outsourced, they are activities that involve, outdated equipment or even polluting solutions. And there, the companies who offshore them and outsource them, in many cases, they did not bother putting in the right innovation to help that local community in Asia, for instance, to come up with a more environmentally friendly solution, right? And there, for instance, educating these communities and the education, for instance, at the workplace and for the workplace in universities, they are also going in a direction that is not organic for the place, right? So if I take a look at India or Taiwan or even China, in many cases, they have built during the last few decades, education funnels that are solely supporting and filling, jobs that we've created there. So uprooting these and reshoring these operations will leave them very much stranded, right? So we also need to think about these long-term aspects of offshoring, and we usually don't do it, right? And of course, with that said, this lack of ownership globally, where we place activities very far from us, and the decision making as well as the ownership resides in a different country who have probably very limited or even no understanding of what is the local driver of some of the impacts that they are making there. It's really something that we should get rid of if we really are honest to ourselves. How do I make a decision from Western Europe in China when I don't even understand how the government works, really, right? So just giving a good example there. And of course, the visibility over how the total cost of these really long value chains develop at the moment, it is also really hard and complex to put together, and many companies don't take the pain, quite frankly, to deal with these aspects, right? So they have a really high-level overview of what they are doing, but at the same time, they don't bother looking into the details and what really the consequences or that they impact on or inflict in these communities. And just to conclude from my side, and to close the corporate side of this equation, what I see and what I find as a professional is really a set of conditions that left us with, lack of innovation where we would really need it, and lack of innovation money to go into sustainable and circular solutions, right? So I see a lot of innovation money going into solutions which are far from being sustainable and circular in the first place. And still we are struggling to find investment into circular solutions, right? That needs to change. And also these innovation support and money, they don't build communities and preserve income at the right place of ownership, right? So when I take a look at the corporate incentives and how we really got here from a financial and incentive perspective, I really just ask the question myself every day, when I work. So how did we really get here, and where did we lose that plot, where we stop seeing, the long-term impact and how we can really fix this, And for me, the key here is really to either move away from metrics like ROI, IRR, and RONA, where I think I might have an obligation to explain. ROI, I believe the majority knows, return on investment. IRR is internal rate of return. And RONA is really return on net assets. So these are financial metrics that are so narrow in terms of how they measure profitability and how they put out a metric that is solely percentage based and money based, that we really need to get back to total cost of ownership and total impact of economy measures, to see really end to end and deep down to the last levels of how we make an impact. Or in fact, I don't want to say that, measures and metrics are inherently bad themselves, but we also need to then correct how we are using these metrics, like ROI, IRR, and RONA, right? So then in that case, we really need to strictly correct what elements we are putting into those calculations, and just make sure that we don't forget about the impact of offshoring innovation. Means that we are losing that capability, and we forget that know-how, and we might necessarily or we never get it back. Simple as that. So it can happen that the company that we outsource and offshore to, they become our direct competitors, as we have seen in some cases, right, in the electronic industry. So for me, this is really one of those key elements where corporations can do a huge deal in changing their behavior towards how they are impacting global and local communities, and stop putting out empty marketing slogans like localized behavior and global thinking, local acting, because it's just not happening, right, Mike? So for me, that's really one of those points that where I would like to see a change in behavior and change in how we feel responsible from a corporate perspective for our metrics and how we are managing global and local communities. What do you think?
Yeah, I could only agree with what you're saying, Sophia, and I'd like to go ahead and take the baton from you and stay with this subject of quick returns. But before I do that, just to remind anybody, or to make sure that everybody's in the know, we are talking about global supply chains and some of the problems that we don't necessarily talk about. And I'm going to take the baton, as mentioned, and concentrate a little bit on that element of efficiency. What I heard you talking about, Sophia, is a financial models that basically encourage us to go ahead and hoard cash, to come up with quick wins, which means that we are not capable, or we're not interested in going ahead and making investments in things that meet our medium and long-term goals. So we have a whole slew of cash looking for quick wins, and that's one of the reasons, something that we talked about yesterday, tied to the stock market. And the real issue, and this is something that I've noticed over the years, is that we have put this complete emphasis on efficiency. Efficiency is always the goal. And as you could see in this model, and I really thought long and hard about what does that actually entail, and how can we go ahead and push the message together in a way that people understand. Now, please don't get me wrong. I am not against standards. Quite the opposite. If we have complete chaos, then then everybody kind of does whatever, and we need to have some sort of alignment. That we all understand in which direction we're going. So please, this is not an anti-standard message. That being said, and this goes directly in line with that of what Sophia was talking about, then the efficiency becomes a means to an end. So we concentrate on efficiency. We think that the more efficient we are, the better. But everybody, when we stay in this model, forget the concept of value. And so if we look at the flip side, that being flexibility that's required. And now there's one message that we really get starting in the middle of March with the lockdown, is that we needed to be a little bit more flexible, certainly more agile. And we saw that the companies who were able to go ahead and adjust to these broken supply chains were able to go ahead and profit. So the point here is making sure that we can't come up with a proper balance tied between the concept of a standard and then looking at it from a flexibility perspective. As Sophia mentioned, she was concentrating primarily on the customers. I'd like to look at the corporates. I'd like to go ahead and look at the customers. And I think there are a number of us out here, and I'd like to speak to all of you who feel that you're trying to live a sustainable life and you're continuously challenged based upon a lot of those things that Sophia talked about, our current situation where we never have enough time to complete everything that we need to, don't even talk about those things that we want to. So it is tough being sustainable, and especially if we look at those messages, again, something that Sophia had mentioned, that it's more or less marketing or lip service. I don't know about you, but often I feel hoodwinked that somebody sold me some goods that they didn't hold up to the promise. And so this is another one of the challenges that we have moving forward. I personally believe that we're much more empowered than we give ourselves credit for. And that's what I'd like to go ahead and focus. The first part that really goes wrong, and I think that goes in line with everything that Sophia was saying, that we've lost the focus, and the focus should actually be on the customer. If you take a look at this model that I have on the screen right now, if we were to look at all the departments of a corporation, if they were to be focused on the customers and making sure that the customer experience is meaningful, then obviously they would be working more together because their goal would be working on customer satisfaction. So what does that actually look like when we're concentrating on the subject of sustainability? I use a term called circular experience. Let me go ahead and explain to you what I'm referring to here. Circular experience means what it's like for the customer who is trying to live a sustainable life, has a clear interest in making sure that her decisions are based on sustainable choices, and it becomes so damn difficult to actually go ahead and hold to it. Let's go through a typical day where obviously we're looking at the clock all the time. Do we have enough time? And we're compelled to continuously concentrate on convenience, which was an alliteration. Some days, I don't know what it's like for you. Some days I say, I have no time to be sustainable. And of course I feel awfully guilty afterwards, but that's not the way it should actually work. We know what the answer is. And my goal for today is to go ahead and unveil this and make sure that we have a common understanding, and perhaps maybe for some of you to look at this as being a call to action. Sophia talked about a number of examples of where, due to the models that we created within the global supply chain, that we performed an act of degradation. Let me go ahead and explain to you what I mean by degradation, perhaps piggyback on some of those things that Sophia talked about. We saw within the first lockdown, when the supply chains were destroyed, we had certain touch points throughout the entire world that were in complete disarray. Okay. But we had put them in a situation where they had no way out. Let me give you two examples that you might have heard of so far. One would be tied to the flower industry in Kenya. Now, the amount of GDP that's actually generated by selling flowers primarily to Europe is huge in Kenya. It employs, not sure exactly the number, in fact, it's immaterial, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of employees who are responsible for actually going ahead and picking those flowers that we put on our table. So, of course, we had our first lockdown. All the transportation was broken down. So who were the flowers for? They weren't for Kenyans. First of all, they couldn't afford it for the most part. Secondly, it's not something that they can use for other purposes. Please don't get me wrong. I have nothing against flowers. I like flowers. But we need to go ahead and look at things in context. So, of course, they couldn't go ahead and export it. The main country would have been Holland in this case. They couldn't export the flowers to Holland. The flowers are perishable. And that meant that the flowers were meant to rot. and of course, there was no income coming through because the flowers weren't being sold. And with that, you had hundreds of thousands of employees that were more or less sacked without any type of restitution, because, of course, the whole idea of a welfare state is something that we in the global north take advantage of, or we take it for granted, better said. So we created a situation where they produce something that they can't really use themselves, and as soon as we go ahead and say we don't need it anymore, or we're compelled to move away from that, they're left holding the bag. Let's look at fast fashion in Bangladesh. There's another situation where they couldn't go ahead and send it to the H&Ms and the Primarks of this world. So what happened? Of course, primarily women who are working on minimum wages, and were left high and dry. So in fact, interestingly enough, you had some initiatives coming primarily out of the UK, the ones I've seen, where they were willing to actually go ahead and buy the clothes from the former employees just to make sure that they were able to receive some money. That cannot be a solution. So let's concentrate on that, of what's to be found on this slide that I'm showing to you right now. Let's move away from the degradation that's wearing us down. Let's go towards restoration. Restoration needs to be our goal. So if we're setting up a roadmap, we need to make sure, first of all, those areas where we have put them in this situation, we need to come up with restorative solutions. We cannot just go ahead and leave these people in the lurch. Again, piggybacking on that of what Sophia is talking about, we cannot afford to do that. We do not have the moral authority to do this. That one's very clear to me. So we need to concentrate on restoration instead of concentrating on degradation. But it takes a little bit more than that. This is a model that comes from a concept called permaculture. And I think that this model plays a very important role in various concepts. And I'd like to go ahead and take the financial and use that as example, that of what Sophie was talking about. But first of all, let me go ahead and describe to you what you see on this slide. It's called the ethical foundation. Foundation, that means that's what we base things on. Let's starting from the right to the left, and then I'll go to the top. Care for people. That needs to be our focus. We need to make sure that we take care of people, and that needs to be part of whatever model we come up with. Care for the earth. Obviously, that's the one that that gets a bunch of publicity these days. We talk about this subject quite often. We tend to forget the people part, unfortunately. Yesterday's live stream was another example of that, looking at the cocoa industry. But the real key for me is the component to be found on the top of this pyramid: return the surplus. And so how do we actually go ahead and return the surplus? If we have something left over, then we bring it back to where it came from. In this particular case, it would be nature. Looking from a purely material perspective, that means we need to have materials that can be brought back to nature and don't end up in a landfill and don't poison nature because of something that we went ahead and created. But there's another component that I think is very important to go ahead and concentrate on, and that would be within our community. If we have extra, then we need to invest in our own community. And that's going to be the message I'd like to go ahead and focus on for the rest of the slides. How do we go ahead and return the surplus that we have, return it back to the community? First of all, we need to go ahead and understand what is our community. Do we feel that we have a good grasp of what our community is? Do we understand that by investing in our community, that we're actually investing in our future, that we're actually investing in ourselves, that we're investing in an infrastructure that belongs to us? Let's think about, again, piggybacking on that of what Sophia was talking about. I'm going to go ahead and try to come up with a narrative and see how much you could actually go ahead and follow of that. So usually in a town, we go ahead and try to attract businesses from outside of the country or outside of town, and we usually give them some sort of incentive to go ahead and set up their business, right? So what's actually taking place? The incentive is that surplus that I was referring to going to somebody else. Now, that means we are putting ourselves hostage. We do not know what they're actually going to do in our community. The money that is invested in our community could be here today, gone tomorrow. And let's go ahead and explore another way. We actually take our funds, that surplus that we have, and we start figuring out ways to invest in our own community. And so, can you imagine a world where we go ahead and say, this is where we live, this is where we want to go ahead and invest, and let's assume we all get together and we decide that the surplus we have, we're going to invest in our own community. What actually takes place there? Think about that as an individual. That means, of course, me, I want to make sure I get a return for my investment. And so I'm going to make sure that this business that I'm investing in within my community, that they are holding to my standards. In other words, we get to go ahead and set the standards that are to be found within our community. And that means that the businesses to be found in our community have to adhere to our standards. So what happens if they don't adhere to our standards? If it was me, I'd be knocking on their door and said, hey, I'm the one who gave you the money. You better get your act together. And I think that all of a sudden, can you imagine putting yourself in that situation that you are suddenly empowered to go to a business and say, I invested in your business. I am supporting you, and I expect you to actually run your business in a way that I think is ethical. That would be a quantum shift. Don't you think that we have the power, all of us together, to go ahead and make that happen? We do. We just don't give ourselves the credit for it. And of course, we don't expect just that we invest in the business, but that the business goes ahead and invests in us, in our own community. The business is following our standards. We are keen that the business flourishes because it's our money, it's our surplus that we invested in the business. So do you think we're going to keep it a secret about the money that we invested? Not necessarily the money, but rather the businesses? If it was me, I'd go ahead and tell all my friends and family, this is a great business because they hold to this standard. So that means that all of us are ambassadors for our community. So let's go ahead and continue with this narrative. So our business is flourishing. That means our community is flourishing. What happens to those businesses? Those businesses, of course, are growing, and they're going to need personnel. So all of a sudden, we have a possibility to get youth to be employed. We have a possibility of making sure that everybody in our community is not only just treated with respect, that we make sure that everybody's taken care of. That's part of our standard, and that could only be done if we decide to go ahead and take control for ourselves. We decide that this is our tribe. This is our tribe that we're actually going ahead and concentrating on, and that means that we're able to go ahead and we go far beyond this idea of just bringing the surplus back into the community, that we build infrastructures that are sustainable, truly sustainable, and we reinforce this concept of community, because then we make sure that everybody in our community is doing fine. And I don't know about you, but that would be one definition I would take up as a great place to live. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and close with one last comment. And this is tied to something that I thought was quite interesting, especially, again, piggybacking on that of what Sophia was talking about. We think that the word economics is a dirty word, but the actual origin of the word economics comes from Aristotle, and the word was oikonomia. Take a look at the definition that I have on the screen right now. Household management to create value for all. Value for all. That means the household that we're really talking about here is our community, that we are ensuring that there is value to be distributed to all. And for me, that would be the place that I would like to live in. And I hope that I was able to inspire some of you to actually go ahead and feel the same. So I think that we've gone ahead and bludgeoned everybody in submission, Sophia. I don't see any comments in the chat box, but I'd like to go ahead and just make some closing comments from my side. And perhaps you might have some things you'd like to go ahead and add as well. That was really powerful what you talked about. And I don't think that people really understand the magnitude of some of these things that you were referring to. I'm not quite sure how we go ahead and bring the message across better.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, what I've seen is really entire communities, literally, I would say, I just pick, a few countries that I already mentioned, either in the UK, the northern manufacturing territory, or in some parts of Europe, complete Eastern European bloc, or even some of the U.S. communities, right, in the south, or even the east coast of the U.S. earlier. So that is one side of the tide of that impact, and the other side is really the vast communities. And I'm thinking of, if you just take a look at the single city of Bangladesh, or any of the others, right? They are around 13, 15 million people each, right? And the majority of those are majorly built around foreign companies going there and requiring skills and work that they wouldn't normally do in their communities unless those companies are there, right? So imagine uprooting those as part of, any pandemic or any other issue, and then just moving it back, reshoring back anything to US or Western Europe. That's an impact of each of them 13 million, right? And this is just number of people. I didn't even mention, the amount of money. I think I can relate back to so many of the aspects that you pulled, starting from, how much we are investing from a local community perspective into ourselves as human beings, right? Let's start with that as well. If I see as a professional that I need skills to be able to afford living on this planet where I live, I need skills that I would normally not develop within my area, then I will go ahead and develop those, right? But if those skills are not required from one day to another or 1 month to another, suddenly, then I already paid a lot of money from a development perspective. I paid 5 years of uni or something, and then in the end I'm left there, as you said, high and dry. Or even just think, and it's really trying to bringing it closer to personal decisions, or even going back to that aspect of trying to be sustainable as a consumer, right? As you said at the start. And for me, companies really don't make it easier for us to see where things come from. And if I just think of my phone or anything that I'm using every day, even the headset I'm using right now, do I have really the opportunity to take a look at how the pieces of that puzzle were put together, and are they using fair labor? Are they doing the right things? They're reinvesting money in the community, and etc. And that is also something that I would say it's really an aspect that we need to push forward to ensure that people can really see transparently what they are getting, as you said. And last but not least, I would also have reflection on that, reinvesting into and rechanneling back into that local community those funds and money and resources that have been taken away. I think I'm not against global companies, and please don't think I am. What I think is a necessary step is to level the playing field between global companies and local companies, and ensure that even taxation, for instance, in the US, there was a huge gap between imported goods from other side of the planet, and they paid around 17% of tax from a corporate tax perspective, while the local companies who were producing locally in the US, they had like 26.7% taxation rate as such. So I would say that between the 17%, roughly 17, and roughly 26%, there is a huge gap and an incentive to move things out of the US, right? And it was there for quite a long time, if I'm not mistaken. So that's what I really meant by leveling the playing field, and really making global corporations pay taxes back to the communities where they take the resources from. So I think that's another aspect that looks back into what you said, Mike, all along the time. So there we owe a lot from a legislative perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, Sophie, and I'm very thankful to have people like Balash who went ahead and joined us. Thank you very much, Balash, for joining. I'd like to go ahead and start with his perspective, and I think that this is very very poignant. Not saying that globalism is not playing a bad role, but as stated here, focusing on local can work, and I think that's extremely important. If I think about a lot of the possibilities that were generated due to the idea of globalism, where in fact, in my personal opinion, we were able to go ahead and reach the Millennium Goals simply because we were able to go ahead and bring opportunities to areas that did not have them before. That does not mean, though, that we go ahead and continue and just working on exploitation. My goal would be to be global, make sure that information is free, but then you go ahead and make sure that whatever is done on a local level is regenerative. And that would be the solution of how we could actually go ahead. I mean, let's be honest, I would be the last one who would be against globalism because I would not be where I am today if I didn't have that mindset. Yes. And so I think it's very important to concentrate on that. And we should make a clear differentiation. It's not against globalization as such. The idea is equity. We want to make sure that everything is equitable, everything is fair. And there is no contradiction between the two, that we can concentrate on both. And in fact, it's our responsibility, if we look at the protection, and I'll go ahead and put this on pause after the statement. If we look at this concept of protectionism, it's actually the antithesis of what we've been talking about. That means we're going to hoard everything for ourselves, which clearly is not equitable. And we cannot just go ahead and look at those things that are taking place within our borders. And we feel that then the rest of the world, they should go ahead and deal with whatever and fend for their own causes themselves. That is not fair, and that is not very equitable. And so that cannot be part of the equation.
Absolutely, and could not agree more, Mike. And just to add to the fire a little bit, I also managed to fish out some other numbers from my head. But if I really take a look at the fact that we are still at a stage where it's heartbreaking to see that how waste management is a booming industry in Asia because of the trash being consistently dumped there, right? And it's like 60-70 billion level industry as such, and even beyond that, right? So alone that is a fact where I say we really need to do much more from every single angle to end that madness. And of course, I'm not saying every little counts, when we think about cleaning up our planet and getting there, but that industry needs to slowly diminish because we start doing the right things, and those people who are doing those jobs, they need to get proper jobs which they can do based on their skill set, the local resources and the local strengths and everything that they have there, instead of collecting trash that we are dumping there and make a very bleak living on that, whether we like it or not, right?
Mm-hmm, sure. Maybe some closing words from my end. I was trying to be provocative. I was trying to get people to think about things that either you didn't think was possible or you don't think they were necessary. And I was hoping that I would actually offend a few people here along the ways, but obviously I wasn't. I was not provocative enough. All kidding aside, I think that there are two parts to this, that either we go ahead and take charge of these elements that clearly belong within our power, and we make sure that we hold to the responsibility of having that power and understanding the responsibility that we have to that of what's been done so far. And I would hope that people would feel empowered. I have another question. Let me go ahead and take this one on. From Samson, what does local even mean in 2020? Very good point. The so-called local community. it might be outdated. And I firmly agree. If I think about all the individuals who will be watching this live stream right now, that clearly applies. So Samson, thank you very much for that comment. But I would
Can I
like to
just
go
add
ahead.
one thing?
Sure, of course,
Sorry,
please.
sorry,
Yes.
Mike. Just wanted to add
Good.
one thing to this, local versus global community.
Hmm.
And I would have, just one reflection here. And it's a question back really to Samson 0190. Are we really thinking that we are really that global? That's the other side of the equation. We think about local communities that they are disappearing because we are so global, but are we really able to grasp, the context and what does it really mean that we are global or we consider ourselves global? Because on an everyday level, let's face it, we are quite local, right? And that's what means, and that's exactly the definition of local community for me, because as a human being, throughout our lifetime, we can only have as much reach as we have, around us. And I don't want to go into, philosophical heights of what is global and local, but I also think, and then this is based on my personal experience working in very globalized roles previously. It is also partially a fallacy that we can grasp, big enough. We many times think so much that we really grasp something globally, and yes, we can get to really good knowledge of what is going on this planet globally. But I think we really need to be humble and acknowledge that as a human being, our skills and capabilities will never be big enough to really grasp what is global, and what is really globality as such on this planet. So I really would urge people to think about, are we really honestly thinking we are global, and what local means to us? I think it's a good question back to everybody. What does it mean to be local for yourself as a professional and as a human being in your private life? It's a really good question.
Well, let's be honest. Who's going to know your own backyard like you can yourself?
True.
And I think that's the real point that we need to go ahead and take into consideration. And I think in closing, looking at it from my perspective, and I'll make sure that you are given the last word, dear Sophia. I'd like to go ahead and consider this to be a call to action to you to see to what degree, whether you can test some of these things that we talked about, whether you are able to go ahead and challenge us, because only by challenging our concepts can we ensure that they are not only valid, but that they're robust enough for all of us to go ahead and move forward. And I make that as a personal challenge to all of you to see if there's something in there that you can go ahead and take and run with. And that would be the biggest hope that I could wish from our session today.